Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you.
Welcome back to In a Nutshell. Today I'm going to talk some more about specific crops and different types of fertilization. And this is actually two parts, one part here, and down the road I'll do another one. But because they're really, even though they're the same crops, they're handled totally different. So we're going to talk about what I like to call winter forage crops. And what I mean by that is they're usually oats, wheat, barley, triticale, and then some offshoots of that they might add to those, annual ryegrass, etc. And most of these, when I talk about winter forage crops, they can be used in many different ways where people will just plant them. Particularly when I was in New Zealand, I saw them planting some crops I haven't seen around here that were used for winter forage down in their territory for their dairy cattle. And they would lay them out there, just turn the cattle loose on them part of the day, then pen them up and get them ready for milking, etc. So colder down where I was at in that particular part of New Zealand, and a lot of frozen ground. So this you need crops that can survive these frozen or very cold temperatures. Across the Midwest, there's not a lot of forage crops because a lot of it's got snow and ice on top of the ground for a lot of the wintertime. So things aren't conducive to grow. So I'm going to really talk mostly about more in the West, where we've got more temperate temperatures, do have some frost, and these crops would be suitable for those minor temperatures, maybe down into the mid-20s, something like that. So we'll talk a lot about, the different ones, and a lot of times the thing that's different about them than what I would call winter grains or spring grains, people, particularly in the Midwest, and even out here in California, they will plant spring wheat. They'll plant wheat in the spring and actually growing it out for the grain. Or you'll plant a winter wheat, which is also planted and then harvested in the spring. But out here we have a lot of dairies, biggest dairy state in terms of cow numbers anywhere and volume.
Now Bill's going to get into talking about forage crops.
And so we do a lot of planting of a forage crop to make additional silage or make additional hay for dry stock, for heifers, for other, not necessarily the milk cows because there's not enough energy in them. And so we put combinations together. A lot of times we'll put an oat with a wheat and a barley, or we'll put a triticale with maybe a wheat or a barley. We may plant just a strict barley or strict wheat, which we may use them as a beardless variety so that they're more palatable, and grow them up so that cattle, we might what we call headlage, or basically take the heads off and make a high protein mix. So many uses. So we'll talk a little bit about all of those.
Bill's now going to start talking about oats as a winter forage crop.
And I'll start with just oats. It's one of the ones that's been used probably the longest out here. And they used to have old varieties, the Canada oats and Swan oats and Montezuma oats. And now we've come up with a lot of newer varieties. I don't want to focus too much on varieties as much as how you put them together, these blends together. You want to put together, you don't want to put together an oat that is so vigorous, say a Swan that dwarfs your wheat and barley, and it struggles to gain traction to get going. So you might want to use maybe a Canada or Montezuma, a little lower stature when you're putting your forage crops together. But using some of the beardless wheats and beardless barleys, they give you a little stronger structure on the stalk. And then if you want to do something like if you've got the conditions are right, you can actually plant a vetch to it, and that'll be a legume that you can plant in there. Some people will also use a winter ryegrass, or they use a triticale, which is a kind of a wheat type crop that can be utilized for these forage crops. And so we put them together, and some people in California, if they've got early maturing corn for silage and they take it off in early to mid-August, and they'll come back and replant a crop, and with irrigation, which we have at that time, they're able to grow up what I call a short-statured crop, which means it'll only be 2.5, 3 foot tall, where they can come in and leave part of that, say 6 to 12 inches, still growing, and take the top off and give them a little bit more feed and feed value.
Now Bill's going to get into talking about the different applications for these crops.
The different uses for these crops are also whether you're going to go for hay or whether you're going to go for more of just a green, I wouldn't call them green chop, but they're chopped green and laid and let wilt for maybe a day before they're picked up and put into the ensiling process. But one of the things you want to do is the stage. What are you trying to get to with that particular winter forage crop? If you're trying to maximize feed value, as that head emerges, you really want to cut those in what we call the boot stage, which is it's not fully mature and the grain hasn't expressed itself, but the feed value has been found to be at its highest in that boot stage. And so getting those balance, and that's why you go back to what type of oats, wheat, and barley do I put together. If I have an early maturing Montezuma or Canota or Swan, whenever those mature, if I've got something that in the barley side that matures much sooner, then it's past the boot and already into the grain stage, so I'm losing it. So what we try to match is if we have an early maturing wheat and barley, we try to get an early maturing oat that goes right with it and fits it. If we have a late maturing oat, then we try to put our barley and wheat so that they are also late maturing. So what we're doing is really looking at when they come together. Some people will just plant a straight crop of, say triticale, or they'll do just a straight crop of beardless wheat or beardless barley, and just go for maximum quality and feedability, and it's got a lot more protein, more energy. If you just do those and then you don't need to worry as much about the timing. Some people just need a lot of volume of feed. They're a little short, so they need maximum barley. And this is where you usually, with these forage blends, can maximize production. Making hay is very, very similar too. What am I going for? If I'm going for roughage, maximum volume, then I may want to come back and utilize a crop that's when it matures, I would do them, cut them in the boot stage, lay it down and make a hay. Or some people, like if you're making, say, an oats for horse hay, you're looking more for the grain, so you're not going to worry about the boot stage as much as you are getting it to the stage where there's a lot of grain involved in those heads and putting it down.
Now Bill's going to start talking about the importance of fertility when it comes to these winter forage crops.
Whether it's, for forage or whether it's for grain, one of the things that you want to do is make sure you have your fertility in line. Okay, so a lot of these forage crops, they'll grow well in the fall and then slow way down into the wintertime and grow slowly, and then as the spring temperatures come up, take off and then go through their normal reproductive cycle, which is they head out, start to put on their heads to finish their growing cycle. One of the things you have to be careful with, because there's a lot of leaf diseases inherent with these types of winter forage crops, and you've got wet, moist conditions, and over-fertilized in the nitrogen, you will get a lot of leaf diseases that will be more prevalent. One of the things on dairies, if we're utilizing our dry manure or even our lagoon water and putting them out, then we probably want to back off and use little to no commercial nitrogen until we get into the spring when we need to get them woke up and start to go again. And so that's why we would wait and not put a lot of excessive nitrogen early on. Another one is if you're going to make that where you're going to have what I call a shortcut, 3 or 4 foot tall, come in and leave a foot and take the top 3 feet off. Well, you can put a little bit of extra nitrogen to get it up and growing faster, so you can get that off and let them go back through, let them stool out, which means basically that plant will begin to put, some side leaves, branch out, and want to start to grow again. As they do that, then we have got enough nitrogen there. And then if you're getting rid of your, you probably put some dry manure, which will kick into gear now. Maybe a lagoon, you have to get rid of that sometime in the fall, late fall or into the winter. You can have that. So you just need to balance it, because excess nitrogen is really hurtful to these crops. They will get, rust and several other leaf diseases if they're just put on with too much nitrogen. The other thing we need to look at, and if you aren't a dairy, if you're just growing them, maybe that feed or that crop for hay, or you're growing that feed for a dairyman that wants to come and chop it, or that wants to make hay out of it, what you want to do at that point is that you'll need to probably look carefully at, guess what? What am I going to tell you? Look at your soil sample and see where your potassium levels are. These are going to go through the winter, and even though we're not heavy rainfall areas here, we're probably 15 to 18 inches of rain in a good year, 12 to 15 in an off year. Sometime as that rain falls, you're going to have that moisture is going to get on some fairly big plants, and they can cause them to lodge, or you can cause them to break over and go down flat, which is never good for these grain crops. We want to keep them erect and standing as much as possible. So one of the things that gives it strength is potassium. So we want to look at our potassium levels. Doesn't mean we need to add a lot as long as we have a sufficient amount there. But around here through our light sandy soils, one of the things we find that is it's hard to hold enough potassium in there. And so a good application just as you're at planting time would be probably enough to get them. When I say that, depending on what your soil conditions are and what form of potassium, but you're probably going to need to put on 250 pounds of actual K, and that'll give you a good boost. It'll take you all the way through to the end. If you're dairy that's got excess potassium because you're getting a lot through your manure or your lagoon applications, you're probably going to be fine. You'll also always need to balance that because you're going to also be putting on a lot of extra nitrogen, which is going to make it grow a little bit willowy and be subject to lodging too. So it's a balancing act of how much nitrogen can I put on, how much of this manure and lagoon water can I apply, and then how much do I have to support that with potassium. The other nutrients that also help it really get very, resilience and being able, and the standability is manganese and copper. And manganese is very important to any of these growing crops, these annuals, particularly because they are necessary to form an enzyme, which if that enzyme is not present, then the crop does not form sufficient amount of lignin. And lignin is the cell wall strength that gives corn, these forage crops, that stiff stalk that will make it stand in off conditions, which is windy, rainy conditions. And so that is very important. So again, back to your soil samples, where are we? Do we have a sufficient amount? Are we excessive? All of those play into what it is I need to make sure so I can keep it standing. The other nutrient I talked about too is copper, and a lot of people will have copper left over. And one of the things where you look at a dairy and a lot of their lagoon water will be rich in copper because a lot of the foot baths that they'll have for their dairy cattle to prevent hoof rot, etc., will be a copper sulfate blend. Some will use a zinc sulfate. Copper sulfate's been used for years. And one of the things about micronutrients, particularly copper, if you can get the number up, even if you go to a different product or don't put that on anymore onto that particular one. That copper will stay for years. What copper gives it is it's basically nature's natural fungicide. So it gives that plant, that forage in these off conditions where you may have more leaf diseases, it can cut down on a lot of disease because it's a great, fungicide that gets a lot of these fungal diseases that want to deposit on leaves and really do damage to the volume and also the quality of the forage. They'll use that. And so copper in its best is taken in small doses, but it's in that plant, and it will help those disease fighting fungals diseases that will attack it. The other thing it does is it gives it what we call resiliency. And what I mean by that is as you're getting close, and this is getting fairly big and heavy, and you're starting to put grain on the top of it, so it's got a lot of leverage that's wanting to pull it down. What copper will give it in any plant, it'll allow it to bend but not break. So it'll help the standability, but it'll also help it as it bends over and it gets a couple of good days of sunshine behind those rain, and it'll bring it back up again. We see it in tree crops all the time, but it's really valuable in these annuals like the winter forage crops and corn to have enough copper to keep those standing. There's tons of different things you can do with a winter forage. Like I said, you can make a green chop. Normally the natural way to do that is to go through with a swather and basically cut and crimp it and move across, and usually most of the time letting it lay a day, let it wilt down a little bit because it's got a lot of moisture in it, and then basically coming back with a chopper with a little bit different head, a lot easier to get through your field at a rapid pace with those, and put those down and then take them to close to the dairy, and then where they can put it in a pile and pack it and then sile it properly, and you've got a really nice feed that you can use for a lot of different uses there. Some people, like I talked earlier, will take a barley or in some cases I've seen triticale, but barley and wheat are probably more the ones I've seen where they make what I call headlage, where they cut it high and they will just take the heads off of the grain after they've matured and put that into a bagging situation rather than a big open pit of silage. They'll put it into a bag, which will be a real high energy, high protein feed that they'll put into their dairy rations, and that works really well also. And again, like I say, making hay is just a whole different deal. It depends what you're planning to do. Are you going to sell it? Are you going to sell it and then you got to know what type of customer you're going to sell it to. If you're in an area where there aren't many dairies and you're doing a dairy quality hay, it's probably not going to be received as well as if you're doing something as high grain and clean without a lot of weeds that would be good for the dairy. I mean, for the horse industry, where you've got people, backyard horses, or people that have their horses on their ranches. It's just a really good feed. Horses have always liked that long-stemmed oat hay for years, and it fits into the program. Gives them that kick from the energy from the grain in it. So it is a different story, but no matter what you're growing on a winter crop, and one of these times here in the future I'll be talking about the winter, instead of forage crops, winter grain crops. What you're growing during the winter or spring, why you're growing it, and what it's good for. And it's done a little bit differently. But much the same as silage corn with these winter forage crops, you're still looking for quality of forage. And that really gets back dependent on when I cut it, what I'm trying to do, how I'm trying to feed it to maximize the quality, protein, those other nutrients that I want to be in that forage. And knowing when to cut it, knowing what kind of balance. And there are a lot of people, a lot of companies that are out that are commercial, sellers of seeds, and you work with them over a period of time. The best thing I've always said, I like to look around my general area and find out what my neighbors are planting, and if I like the looks for what I'm trying to do it, and I go ask him what he planted and who he got it from, and that would be a good way to start your first venture into this. Most people are pretty well versed on what they want to do. So the cropping itself is, in coming back to the fertility side of it, every crop, when you look at that soil sample, you want to make sure you've got a good balance of calcium and magnesium. And the reason being is that you're going into the winter. So one of the things you want to do is make sure you don't have a lot of standing water. So looking at that before you plant your winter forage, one of the things you'll want to do is get that soil sample, or already know what you're going to do with it as soon as your corn crop comes off. And you're going to amend that with calcium, magnesium, or a combination of both, more of a dolomitic lime type of application, to get it balanced. So as you go into the wintertime, when the rainfall comes, because as we know, we have no control over how much and what the volume may be at any one time. It may be dry for a long period of time, and all of a sudden it will take off and drop most of the rainfall in just 3 to 4 weeks. So we've got to get that soil amendment applied pre-plant. A lot of times you're not going to have an opportunity to come back once it starts to grow. So there's your window to make sure your soil amendment's done. There's other multiple ways to get nitrogen applied. You can do it, a top dress, which is basically applying nitrogen, or a combination of nitrogen and some other nutrients early on. But the soil amending's got to be done pre-plant. And another good reason that it works so well is that our normal rainfall has got an acidity to it. It's usually on the acid side. So if you've got a higher pH, it's going to also offset and be able to release some of your calcium and magnesium from these, lime or dolomitic sources. So it's another big bang. And then you don't have to, once that forage crop comes off, your soil should be in great shape to go ahead and be ready for your corn crop that usually follows behind it, or bean crop. Out here we'll also do some dry beans. But so there is some routine to get yourself lined up so that you know what you want to do when that corn crop comes off, and how well we can get it back into play. And then how soon do I need to get it done because I want to have the shortcut? Well, the sooner I can get that back in, the more likely it is I'm going to get that cut off. And that's going to help me maximize the amount of forage I can take off of that. In addition to that, one of the things that you'll find, and this is what you need to be looking at, how much rainfall did you get? And if you've had at least 6 to 12 inches, those nutrients that are the type that leach, one of those, of course, would be sulfur. You're probably, as this grain begins to mature, these winter forage crops begin to mature, that you're going to be out of sulfur, because all of this rainfall during the wintertime, while it's there, not a lot of active growing, you're going to push that sulfur so that it'll be too low. We did a lot of things where some people would fly on urea. Done some forage crops way up in the north part of the state. One of the things I always had them do is put some elemental sulfur back in with those, so that one, it would give it some sulfur. Also, it'll give a little bit of acidity, and you could get a fair amount of sulfur to grow the rest of that crop if you put a little bit of elemental sulfur, like a Tiger 90, or there's several what we call disintegrating grades of sulfur. They're basically pulverized sulfur that have a coating on them, and once they're applied, that coating comes apart pretty easily with a little moisture, and your sulfur gets released. So that's one. The other one is that you really want to, and it's important before things start to head out and grain and become towards grain, is to make sure you have a proper amount of boron out there. So you start with what you got with your soil sample, figure that we probably leached some, because boron is more neutral. It's neither positive nor negative. So with heavy rainfall, it can leach. And here you are trying to form good sources, your good grain head, to really give it the nutrient content, or get that boot stage out so that the nutrients are really heavy into that formation of the grain. Because boron basically will transfer the starch from the leaves that you've formed and put it into that grain. If you're short of boron, you won't be able to transfer nearly the feed value into that. So it's keeping the boron and sulfur levels, because those are the ones you have to worry about the most. The other one, of course, is that you'll probably do a spring application of nitrogen, because most of that nitrogen it's either been consumed or it's been washed through, and pushed through the root zone. So that's really all. Just some few things to look at to make sure that you are ready once you have that first summer crop harvested. You're ready to go right back in with your forage crop, and having a plan put together based on soil samples, what I need to do from a mending standpoint, and then what's my fertility program to get this to the end. And that's it for right now for the winter forage crops. As I said, we'll come back, because the growing grain is a different ballgame altogether, because you're not worried about maybe the stock and everything. You want it to be good and stand up, but you're worried more about how do I maximize grain production. And we'll talk more about that at some future date. Okay, so until next time, stay curious.
Thanks for another absolutely fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that everyone listening thoroughly enjoyed what you had to say about the importance of winter forage crops and how they factor into farming. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.